Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to this session of a Meezan lecture series. So, this is our third session on the Shari'ah of Jihad. We had started to discuss this all important topic of Islam 2 sessions ago, and we will carry on from where we left in our last session. Just to recap, the most important and the most fundamental thing regarding the whole concept of jihad is concerned. We have to understand, first of all, that jihad, whenever it takes the form of qital, which means an armed conflict, then this can only be done and undertaken by state authorities, by a properly organized government, of course, and it would be something that the ruler of that government would have ordered. Other than that, there is absolutely no possibility that any person on his own or her own or any group organization starts any such militant activity. So all military activity has to be initiated by a state authority. No single person has been given this prerogative. We have discussed this earlier also, that only in the Medinan period were the Muslims allowed to take up arms against their enemies and show aggression. In the whole Meccan period, which lasted for more than a decade, even though they were persecuted, even though they were treated extremely harshly, and they had to twice go to Abyssinia and migrate there to escape the sufferings that were caused on them by the Quraysh and the tremendous amount of suffering we have also seen in our history books, in which we know how Bilal radiallahu anhu, he was really subjected to a lot of torture. Ammar bin Yasir, he also was subjected to a lot of torture, and it was during this Meccan period that the Quran told the believers to just be patient, to persevere in their cause, and wait for the time when the Almighty gives them this signal. So it was only in the Medinan period, when an Islamic State had been established, were Muslims given this permission to wage jihad. So this becomes an absolute clarity. It sheds clarity on the fact that as far as waging war is concerned, waging jihad is concerned, then the only uh, the only option which people have, which Muslims have, is that unless their state authorities, unless the government, which is properly organized under a ruler, declares jihad, declares a militant struggle, no one else has this prerogative. The second important thing in this regard is that as far as jihad is concerned, in the times of the Prophet, there are two very distinct forms of jihad that were spelled out. One was to give punishment or to mete out punishment to those who had rejected the truth deliberately. And about them, the Quran had said that war can be waged. Of course, as far as war can be waged was concerned, it was the prerogative of the Almighty. The Almighty had given this choice to the believers, or in fact given this order, that in order to curb persecution, also they can undertake militant struggle. So there was primarily two objectives. One of them was to curb oppression, and the other one was to punish people who had denied the truth. But after the passing away of the Prophet of God, only one of these remains, and that is against persecution and injustice and oppression. As far as punishing people who have denied the truth intentionally is concerned, that was something that was specific to God's messengers. And once the last messenger of God departed from this earth, this no longer can be invoked. Also, as far as jihad is concerned, we had seen that in this regard, a lot of things that today have been going on in the name of jihad, they must be rethought of, they must be revisited, especially as far as the current scenarios are concerned. One of them that is blatantly being violated is that war is also waged against non-combatants, and non-combatants are particularly targeted. So this is something which is absolutely forbidden. You just cannot target non-combatants. Only the warring army, the aggressive army, that is the only uh, body, that is the only unit that can be attacked, and that can be in any way launched against whom the military struggle can be launched against. As far as citizens are concerned, as far as people are concerned who are not taking part in the battle, in no way can they be harmed in any way, and if they do so, it will be a grave sin. So these were the three important areas that we have discussed. Of course, there were other details as well. We have seen some of the very minute details that have also been discussed. In fact, if I can just summarize some of the things that we have discussed in a little more way, you can see that we have discussed point number one, which is the permission of jihad, and of course, for which I have just been talking and speaking about, that this is something which is only it can only take place when a state has been established. And then the directive of jihad itself was also discussed, and we have discussed the first 3 points: the nature of the obligation, the driving force, and the ethical limits. And today we'll be discussing the fourth one, which is the ultimate goal. But also, just to recap, remember this is basically Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi's view on jihad that he has enshrined in his book Meezan. And basically, it's a summary of what we are discussing here. And at the same time, I've also been discussing the fact that as far as these discussions are concerned, these sessions are concerned, they are not in the same order as the chapters of the book, but inshallah later on they'll be arranged in the same order. And as far as the current topic is concerned, the topic of jihad, because we are discussing the directive of jihad, and we have already discussed the nature of the obligation, the driving force, and the ethical limits, and today we are going to discuss the ultimate goal. So the verses which are very fundamental in this regard, they were discussed and read out in our first session. I'm going to read them out again today so that we can connect to them and see how the ultimate goal of jihad, which is the real topic today, is derived from these verses. So I'm just going to read out the translation. So these are being displayed before you. It says, "And fight in the way of Allah with those who fight against you, and do not transgress bounds in this fighting." So again, something which is very prominent is that only people who fight against you, only the combatants, only the people in the army that is attacking you are the ones that have to be targeted. No other individuals can in any way be attacked. "Indeed, God does not like the transgressors, and kill them wherever you find them, and drive them out of the place from which they drove you out. And remember, persecution is worse than carnage. But do not initiate war with them near the holy Kaaba unless they attack you there." So an important thing is that the war cannot be initiated in the vicinity of the holy Kaaba, and it can only be done as a defensive measure. And of course, this was also something that the Muslims and the believers, when they undertook or they decided to undertake jihad, was something of a possibility. And because of the fact that they were living in Medina and they wanted to go and visit the holy Kaaba, there was always a chance that the Quraysh would stop them, and then bloodshed would result. So in this background, it is being said, it has been clearly said, that you just cannot initiate any bloodshed unless you face bloodshed, unless you face an attack. And so it's said that do not initiate war with them near the holy Kaaba unless they attack you there. But if they attack you, put them to the sword without any hesitation. Such disbelievers deserve this very punishment. However, if they desist from this disbelief, Allah is forgiving and merciful. And keep fighting against them until persecution does not remain, and in this land Allah's religion reigns supreme. But if they mend their ways, if they mend their ways, so it seems that some part of the text is missing here, of course. So we will insert that text here, but basically it means that if they mend their ways, then there is no reason to continue with this offense. So as far as the ultimate goal of jihad is concerned, that is something that has now to be, that is something that we will now undertake here. So as far as the Quran is concerned, it says that it can only be undertaken against two things. I mean, jihad is something can only be undertaken against two things, and one of them is against persecution, and the other one is to make the religion of God reign supreme. And for this second objective, of course, the words used in Surah Baqarah and Surah Anfal are yakuna dinu lillah, which means God's religion reigns supreme, and the other ones are yakuna dinu kulluhu lillah, all of God's religion reigns supreme. respectively. So remember, as far as the first objective is concerned, which means that people who have denied the truth intentionally and they have to be punished, the word fitna has been used. So the words are la takunu fitna. The fitna should not remain, and this has been clearly said in these Quranic verses. And this is the first type of jihad that we have been referring to, that as far as persecution is concerned, as far as oppression and killing is concerned, that is something that cannot be tolerated. And if someone perpetrates this, then if all diplomatic ties fail, then jihad can be, or a militant struggle can be waged against them. And the second one, which this verse, of course, says, is yakunu dinu kullu lillah, or yakunu dinu lillah, which means that God's religion should reign supreme, and that is that there is no other religion that would be allowed to persist in the Arabian Peninsula with the religion of God. And that is precisely why it was said that as far as the Jews and the Christians are concerned, they cannot have their own religion prevail. They must live in subservience, and they must show this subservience by paying jizya, which is a tax imposed on them. And so the Quran has made it amply clear in this regard. So as far as this goal is concerned, it has to be understood that the Quran is making its point by saying that for as far as the people are concerned who have deliberately denied the prophets of God, have intentionally deliberately denied God's message, it means that they are ones who have to be, in fact, taken into account. And the Quran has actually said that as far as this fitna is concerned, which is persecuting people for the cause of God, against the cause of God, which means that, of course, you are not allowing people to practice their own religion. Remember, the Quran has said, al-fitnatu ashaddu min al-qatl, which means that fitna or persecution is a greater crime than murder. Persecution is a greater crime than murder, and that is why it is essential that as far as murder is concerned, we know how heinous a crime it is. But other than that, we must also understand that when people, they undertake such heinous crimes, and they have to be punished in this way as well. So in the case of people who have submitted to the Almighty, of course, it means that they have accepted the truth. They are ones who are in no way going to be taken into account. But other than that, people who are undertaking injustice in any way, then they have to be punished for this injustice. And remember, this is something of something which is actually grouped with all these directives, that as far as persecution is concerned, one form of persecution, of course, is that you are being, or one form of injustice is that you are persecuting other people. So other forms of injustice also are something that have to be undertaken. Now, as far as the fact is concerned that why should people be punished who have intentionally denied the truths, for that we have to go a little bit deeper and understand the whole concept of the law of messengerhood. We have discussed it in other sessions as well, because this law is something which relates in various ways to various parts and contents of Islam. So here it has to be understood that the Almighty has said, and you can see that this law is being displayed on your screens. It says, وَلِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولٌ فَإِذَا جَاءَ رَسُولُهُمْ قُضِيَ بَيْنَهُمْ بِالْقِسْطِ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. And for each community there is a messenger. Then when their messenger comes, their fate is decided with justice, and they are not wronged. And it is here that we have to understand that as far as the Quran is concerned, it says that there is a law that has to be understood with respect to the Quran, and this law is something that has been described in the Quran in a lot of detail. And that is that as far as individuals are concerned, if they in any way are guilty of denying prophets of God and messengers of God, then about them the Quran says then that they cannot in any way be allowed to go scot-free. They have to be punished. And for this, the law that has been just been described here, dear viewers, is something that we must concentrate on. This is what we call as the law of itmamul hujjah. It means that as far as individuals are concerned, uh, people who deny a prophet of God intentionally, they are put to God's test in a way that, as far as those people are concerned who are primarily monotheists, God gives them the opportunity to live on their religion as much as they can. However, they must live in subservience. So, as far as the Jews and the Christians are concerned, because they are primarily monotheists, so they were allowed to live on their religion as far as their own independence was concerned, but they had to live in subservience. So, the Quran has been very specific in this regard, and it says that people who have taken up any aggression against the messenger of God, and of course, not only that, but they are also guilty of knowing what the truth is. They are absolutely aware of the fact that, as far as religion is concerned, they are absolutely clear about it. They acknowledge God's messenger, but they say that we will not accept him in any way. About such people, the Quran says that this deliberate denial is something which only God would know. There is no other person other than God who can know whether a person is intentionally denying out of his or her own intention or not. So it is God who tells his messenger that now is the time that he has to migrate from his people, he has to leave his people, and they are ones who will now be subjected to punishment, either through divine disasters and divine calamities, these various forms of elements of nature like earthquakes and tornadoes and cyclones will destroy them. And as far as the fact is concerned, that what exactly is the distinction, and we know this very well, that this distinction is that if the number of people who migrate with the messenger are in a relatively large number, and they are also able to acquire political supremacy in an independent piece of land, then the Almighty establishes them in that independent piece of land, and after that they are prepared and they are groomed to wage war. So now that punishment, which generally happens through these natural disasters, it then happens through the hands of the believers, and that is why the Quran says, "Yu'azzibullahu bi'aydikum," that God will punish you or punish them from your hands. So this is one form of punishment in which, of course, when the believers are in a substantial amount with the messenger, they migrate, they form place, they establish their rule there, and then of course the attack can be launched. But there are other instances in which this does not happen, and a messenger has to migrate with only a few of his companions. So in such a case, the Almighty says that, well, once the messenger and his companions are out of their nation, they are at a safe place, then the Almighty destroys his nation through natural disasters. And we know the people of Ad and the Samud and the people of Noah all met this punishment, and all of them met this fate. But one thing that has to be understood here, dear viewers, is that as far as this distinction is concerned, the Almighty has made it in a very, very important way, and that is, people who are destroyed are the ones, or people who are killed are the ones who adhere to polytheism deliberately. So remember, the punishment of polytheism, the punishment of persisting on polytheism, is that they have to be killed. This is the same punishment which the Almighty will implement in the hereafter. So in the hereafter, they will be punished with death. We know that it is like eternal death for them, eternal damnation for them. They will be in hell forever. So this is part of that punishment that is meted out in this world, that when they associate partners with God, since associating partners with God or the punishment of polytheism will not be forgiven in any way by the Almighty in the hereafter if this is done deliberately. So, if in a similar scenario, if this is done in this world as well, remember we are talking about the prophetic period only, not in the post-prophetic period. So, in the prophetic period, if people are guilty of this, of associating partners with God, and in the presence of a God's messenger, they arrive, they come, and they still, in a very defined way, don't accept this, then they are put to death, because this death is the punishment of associating partners with God. Other than that, there are people, of course, who are not punished in this way. And about them, the Quran says very clearly that they are ones who are basically monotheists. They are basically monotheists. But as far as their monotheism is concerned, it's a deviant form of monotheism. So remember, in the times of the Prophet, both the Jews and the Christians were guilty of this deviant monotheism. Christians regarded Jesus to be the Son of God, and the Jews of Arabia regarded Uzair to be the Son of God. So this deviant monotheism gave or they afforded them with an opportunity to live, but they could not have lived they could not have lived such that they would prevail on Muslims. They had to live in subservience. And this is also mentioned in the Quran in Surah Tawbah. So the words are, fight those from among the people of the book who believe not in Allah or the last day, nor hold that forbidden which has been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor adopt the religion of truth as their religion until they pay the jizya with willing submission and are subdued. So you see, it is here that we have to understand that this punishment which is mentioned for people who are deviant monotheists is the one that the Quran has said that as far as they are concerned, then they shall not be given any latitude to have an independent state, and they are ones who have to live in subservience. So as far as the people of the book are concerned, they are ones that they are basically primarily monotheists, but they are not ones who can be allowed to live on their own religion. And as far as the Quran is concerned, it says that as the law of Itmam al-Hujjah is something that has to be understood in all its details. And this law is something, if it is not understood in all its details, then it will be wrong for us to come to the conclusion that even today people of the book or the idolaters can be punished. So remember, punishing people for denying the truth, which is of course kufr, is something that can only happen in the times of messengers of God. This is something that cannot be done in any way against people who today exist. So today war cannot be waged against the people of the book in this manner. So if we look at the times of the Prophet of God himself, we will see that in the case of Prophet Muhammad, once the Itmam al-Hujjah had taken place and the Prophet had migrated with his companions to Medina, it was the Jews who were subdued first. They had been granted amnesty because of various pacts. Those among them who violated these pacts were given the punishment of denying a Rasul, which is of course the messenger of God, Prophet Muhammad himself. And we know that the Prophet exiled the tribe of Banu Qaynuqa to Khaybar and that of Banu Nazir to Syria. Afterwards, the power they wielded at Khaybar was crushed by an attack at their strongholds. And prior to this, we also know that Abu Rafi and Ka'b ibn Ashraf were put to death in their houses. The tribe of Banu Qurayza was guilty of treachery and disloyalty in the Battle of Ahzab. And when the clouds of war dispersed and the chances of an external attack no longer remained, the Prophet laid siege around them. And when no hope remained, they asked the Prophet to appoint Sa'd ibn Mu'az as an arbitrator to decide their fate. Their request was accepted, since at that time no specific punishment had been revealed in the Quran about the fate of the Jews. So Sa'd ibn Mu'az announced his verdict in accordance with the Torah. As per the Torah, the punishment for treason was that all men should be put to death, the women and children should be enslaved, and the wealth of the whole nation should be distributed among the conquerors. And this is exactly what happened regarding the Banu Qurayza. So Sa'd ibn Mu'az gave his verdict based on the Torah, because there was no clear, the verdict in this regard had not been revealed in the Quran by that time. Now, in accordance with this verdict pronounced, all men were executed, and no other incident other than that we know worthy of note took place regarding the Jews in Surah Tawbah, in which the final judgment had been pronounced. Now, as I've just said, that this directive related to both the Jews and the Christians. The punishment mentioned in these verses was in fact a show of great lenience to them, because of the fact that they were originally adherents to monotheism. In reality, they had become worthy of death and destruction after deliberately denying the truth. But because of the fact that they were primarily monotheists, they were not given this punishment, and also they did not benefit from this lenience after the death of the Prophet, because they once again resorted to fraud and treachery. So we know that the Jews of Khaybar and the Christians of Najran, after the Prophet had passed away, were exiled once and for all from the Arabian Peninsula by Umar because of this treachery. And that is why the Quran says, وَلَوْلَا أَنْ كَتَبَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْجَلَاعَ لَعَذَّبَهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَلَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ عَذَابُ النَّارِ, which means that had it not been that God had decreed exile for them, He would have certainly punished them in this world, and in the hereafter theirs shall be the torment of the fire. So this is as far as the fate of the people of the book is concerned. However, when the idolaters of Arabia had been similarly subdued, it was proclaimed in Surah Tawbah that in future no pact would be made with them. They would be given a final respite of 4 months, and then they would be humiliated in retribution of their deeds and would in no way be able to escape from this punishment. So Mecca was conquered, and just as some of the active adversaries among them had been executed when they were caught as prisoners in the Battle of Badr and Uhud, similarly, on this occasion also, these adversaries were put to death. Prior to this, the directive had been revealed about them that it should be proclaimed at the time of Hajj Akbar, which took place in the 9th Hijrah, that once the forbidden months are over, Muslims should slay the idolaters, the polytheists, wherever they find them, except if they accept faith, establish the prayer, and pay zakat. But those among them who were bound in time bar pacts with Muslims were an exception to this directive. So Muslims were asked to honor these contracts until their stipulated time period expired. The implication was absolutely clear that once this would expire, these people would also meet the fate that had been ordained for all the idolaters of Arabia. They were to be killed in case they did not accept faith. This declaration has been made in the Quran, and I'm now going to read out that part of Surah Tawbah, which is verses 3 to 5, in which this declaration has been enshrined and depicted. So it says, and a declaration should be made from Allah and the Messenger to these people on the day of the great Hajj, that Allah is free from all obligations to these idolaters, and so is His Messenger. So, O idolaters, if you repent, it is better for you, but if you turn away, then you know that you cannot escape from the grasp of Allah. And O Muhammad, give glad tidings of a painful torment to these disbelievers, except those of these idolaters with whom you have a treaty, and those who have not shown treachery in it, nor have supported anyone against you. So fulfill their treaty to the end of their term. Indeed, Allah loves those who abide by the limits. Then, when the sacred months after the Hajj have passed, kill these idolaters wherever you find them, and capture them and besiege them, and lie in wait for them in each and every ambush. But if they repent and are diligent in their prayer and give zakat, then leave them alone. Indeed, Allah is ever forgiving and most merciful. So, viewers, you can clearly see how this whole section of Surah Tawbah spells out in detail what has to be done with these idolaters, because these were the people about whom we know that they had intentionally denied, they had associate partners with God, and therefore after that they had absolutely they had no chance to live. So with these measures, the basic objective of war that was stated by the words, remember initially what we had said, the Quran had used these words, yakuna deenu kulluhu lillah, all of Allah's religion reigns supreme. So this was achieved. However, during this period, the Prophet presented his message to all the nearby nations which were outside of Arabia also. So he wrote letters to these rulers, and he made it clear upon them. And these were approximately 13 countries. The heads of state of these countries were written letters, and he made it clear upon them that now Islam alone can guarantee existence for them. This meant that just as the truth had been conclusively communicated through the Prophet to the idolaters and the people of the Book of Arabia, it shall also be conclusively communicated before his death to these nations. And the obvious outcome of this was that these nations also shall be punished in this world as per the divine rule relating to deliberate rejection of the truth communicated to people by their respective messengers is concerned. So this is what happened. And also, after consolidating their rule in the Arabian Peninsula, the companions, in the light of this directive, they completed this task, which was actually initiated by the Prophet, and that is that they launched attack. They launched attack against these countries, giving them two options. If they wanted to remain alive, they have to accept faith, or to accept a life of subjugation by paying jizya. So none of these nations was an adherent to polytheism in the real sense. Otherwise, they would have been treated in the same way as the idolaters of Arabia. So all these 13 states were primarily of the nature of the people of the book, and they were the ones about whom we can clearly say that to whom the truth was communicated. They knew what was going on in the land of Arabia. It was not just the letters that were sent to them that became a cause of their punishment. Remember, after the letters, the Prophet remained alive for many years, 6 or 7 years after these letters were sent, and the fate of what happened in Arabia of these denominations was evident to them. It was discussed and it was communicated right across the borders of Arabia to these 13 countries, and they very well knew. So, as a result, they also became subservient. They also became recipient of this message, and as a result, they were punished later on. And as we've just said, that the Roman Empire, which is the Great Byzantine Empire, and the Persian Empire, of course, both were of them were brought into subjugation. And as far as this subjugation is concerned, it cannot in any way be regarded as one in which it is something that relates to any form of warfare after the departure of the Prophet. Also, we have to understand that as far as the punishment of persecution is concerned, the Quran has made it amply clear that this is something that is the only form of punishment that now remains, or the only form of jihad that can now be conducted today. If people have taken to persecution, then they have to be punished for this, and for this they have to understand that the Quran has given them this directive that of course, military warfare can only be initiated once you are able to understand that the country on whom any aggression has to be launched against is a country who is oppressing their people, who is launching an attack against their attack or aggression against their people by not allowing them to follow their religion, or they are being unjust in any way. So this is something that has also been discussed in verse 75 of Surah Nisa, which says that they have to launch a war against people who are oppressed. Of course, it also means that the war that they have to launch has to be in a way that they know that it's not going to be a suicide mission. They are in a position to curb and check this persecution. So I can summarize this whole discussion by saying that as far as the ultimate goal of jihad is concerned, of the ultimate goal of qital is concerned, it is primarily two. In the times of the Prophet, both these goals were met. One of them was to punish people for denying the truth, which is what relates to the law of Itmamul Hujjah, and the other one was to punish people for persecution, which means that you are not allowing any of your followers or your subservient subjects to follow a religion that they would like. And the Quran has also said that other similar forms of persecution, or you can say injustice, are also subsumed under it. So, in other words, these are the two forms of qital that took place in the times of the Prophet. However, in the post-prophetic period, just one form can be adopted or can be a basis of jihad, and that is to curb injustice and persecution. As far as punishing people for denying the truth is concerned, this type of militant struggle or this type of jihad was solely the prerogative of God's messengers. It cannot be extended in the post-messenger era, in the post-prophetic era. So today, of course, that is something that cannot even be initiated in any way. The only form of jihad that can today take place is the one which I just described before you, against oppression and persecution, and that too when we are absolutely sure of the fact that this is a battle that is reasonably has a very high chance of winning, and at the same time also all diplomatic ties have failed. Yes, we do have some more topics that we will inshallah discuss in our next sessions, which include divine help, the captives of war, the spoils of war. These are the directives and topics that we shall discuss. But primarily, as far as the directive itself is concerned, we have covered a very major part of that. And with those words which I spoke at the beginning of the session, that remember this qital or this militant armed struggle is something that cannot be undertaken by any individual or organization. It can only be undertaken by a state, a country, a government, and if that is not the case, then we are not allowed to lift arms in any way. It is something which we have seen from the Seerah of the Prophet, we have seen from the Quran, that only Muslims, once they had migrated to Medina, were they allowed to lift arms, as far as the fact is concerned that in Mecca they were severely persecuted, they were severely put to torture and punishment, but not once were they allowed to fight back in any way. This permission only came once they had landed in Medina, and that too in the form of that they were now part of a empire. They were part of the first state of the Muslim empire, and that was, of course, that was established in Medina, and the Prophet was its ruler. So I will end my session here with this important confirmation that this is a topic that has to be understood in its very fine details. And remember, one of the causes of today's militancy is by not understanding this law, and the wars which the Prophet of God undertook in his own times, or the ones in which he were attacked, are regarded to be analogous as extrapolation that today also we can wage war in a similar way. Remember, those wars were primarily concerned with the law of Itmam al-Hujjah, the law of messengerhood. They cannot be in any way applied today. And today, the only way or the only form of militant struggle is against persecution. So the likes of people like Mullah Omar or Osama bin Laden or Abu Bakr Baghdadi, who have undertaken this very enterprise, and even today or in the last few decades, they are continuing this struggle, and they receive inspiration or derive inspiration from those Quranic verses which are specifically meant from prophets of God or for messengers of God. They have really misunderstood the purport of the Quran, and in this way, they are guilty of playing God, because it is only God who can punish people for denying the truth, not we in any way. He did so in the times of his messengers because he used his messengers and their companions as his own instruments of justice. This does not take place in the prophetic era. And if we are able to understand this very fine point, we would be able to understand the whole Quran in a way that will make a lot of sense in a lot of its directives. Otherwise, of course, it would be something that we are in no way to justify, as is the case today. So if you have any questions regarding what we have studied today, please raise them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our first question asks, now as the Muslim Ummah is scattered in the form of a number of independent Islamic countries, can each of the Islamic country, in its individuality, decide to wage qital against those who persecute Muslims in other countries?
Yes, that is correct. So individually, I mean, that is a decision that now can be made on an individual basis, because each of them is now an organized country. And so therefore, before they even do that, they have to also see that most of the Muslim countries today are signatories in the United Nations Charter of Peace, in which they have undertaken and given their consent that they will not wage war against other countries. So first of all, they have to either strike off their commitment or the promise they have made, and they must give a very cogent reason that if they are drawing away from this commitment, then it is because they are trying to stop another country from committing aggression against its subjects. And also, of course, they have to be reasonably sure that if they are doing so, then they are not going to they are not going to undertake a battle that is destined to be lost. It has to be waged to be won, actually.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our next question comes from Bisma. Bisma, please go ahead.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Saleem. So my question is that countries like Pakistan, where minorities sometimes, people take offense if something like a Quran page is found somewhere or something is torn up. What about that? These are countries that it's not Afghanistan, where it seems to be, it's a little more kind of ancient. In the ancient times, Pakistan seems to be a modern country in that way. How is it that the Islamic jurisprudence or the Islamic intelligentsia has not been able to establish that these are laws that don't apply to our times? Why is that?
Well, actually, yes, I have been explaining this on other occasions as well, that the primary tragedy that has taken place in this matter is that understanding the Quran directly from its text has become an alien exercise. So what has happened is in the last maybe 12 centuries, people have tried to understand the Quran not directly from the text, but through ahadith or through extraneous sources. And that has actually, I would say, clouded their vision, that has led them away from a lot of things that are directly mentioned in the Quran. Otherwise, if you read the Quran uh, in an unbiased way, in a way that you clearly see that nations are being punished all over the Quran, it is a very common theme that past nations were punished. It has been mentioned copiously in the Quran, and every time the Quran mentions their anecdotes, it tells them that this is because they had denied their messenger. And you at the same time cannot do that yourself, because you're not a messenger of God, and today messengers of God don't come. But as I said, that this is something that this is, I would call it a big intellectual tragedy, because by not understanding this distinction, this difference, all this military aggression and all this terrorism that we today see so rampant all over the world, every now and then we see its episodes igniting one country or the other, taking place so frequently. So that's what comes to my mind. That primarily, there's a law that is so. I mean, it's like that law repeating itself over and over again every time you read the Quran, because you read the history of the past nations. You are told that they have been destroyed by the Almighty. The only difference is that, of course, in the case of Prophet Muhammad, there were no natural disasters that were invoked by the Almighty. So, in the case of the past nations, of course, these natural disasters were the one who destroyed the nations who were denied. So another cause of misconception that could be gauged is that in the times of Prophet Muhammad, because of the fact that a radical departure took place in the form of this punishment, and that was that the Prophet was and his companions were assigned the same task as was assigned to natural disasters in the past. So what the job that was done by natural disasters in the past, which was to destroy nations who were denied, was now given to the Prophet and his companions, and they were told that now they are going to act as those disasters. Now they are the cyclones and the tornadoes and the earthquakes that took place in former periods. So this perhaps could be another reason that clouded the vision, because it is something that is so apparent. And maybe another third thing that comes to my mind now that you've asked this question is that look what the Quran has said about the Prophet. It said, "Laqad kana lakum fi Rasulillahi uswatun hasana," that the best example of the Prophet, the best example of good conduct is your Prophet. So when when they observed that the Prophet was also given this authority that he could wage war against disbelievers to punish them, so they thought that they are just following him, without realizing that yes, the Prophet is Uswa Hasana, he's an exemplar to all of us, but not in some of the very specific areas. Thus, for example, look at the fact that he had to pray six prayers. For example, it's mandatory to pray 5 times for us, but for him, the tahajjud prayer was mandatory. So he that is a special thing. So in that case, you cannot say that you have to follow the Prophet. So similarly, he was given the permission to marry more than 4 wives, and that has a very specific context. Again, you cannot make him an exemplar here. So in a similar way, in the case of Qital also, he was given a specific prerogative, and that was not the only one that he was given. All other and previous messengers of God also were given that commandment or prerogative, but it was extended or unfortunately not understood. So that is what comes to my mind. So had people been perhaps more generous in reading the Quran directly and understanding it, and not taken the route of going to the Quran through extraneous means like hadith or history, this law might have been understood much earlier, I would say. It was left to Ustaz Hamid Farahi, who in the last century, which is like 100 years old, was the first one who actually pointed this out and said that there is being a big mistake being made.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Saleem.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all of the questions. If I'm gonna give another last call. Okay, Amar Rasul, please go ahead. Amar Rasul.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. If there are, I have lots of questions and I can keep asking them if there are no other takers and there is time.
You can continue asking, and if there is another raised hand, I will stop you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Saleem, about this particular thing that you just said, and I have thought about this before as well, that if, you are saying that it was only 100 years ago that Ustad Amin Ahsan Islahi pointed out this.
To be precise, it's Sameeruddin Farahi, actually, his teacher.
Sorry. This gentleman, noble gentleman, he pointed out that this is a divine law that keeps repeating itself in the times of the prophets, and it has happened in our case as well, and we have to look at these verses in a different way. And so would it not have been better if these very harsh verses, very harsh sounding verses, against those who do not believe, might have been delivered to the prophet in secret or in private, and had not been made part of the Quran, which is going to be a book which is forever till the final days. So obviously, my understanding is that there is a lot of communication that is happening between God and the prophet, which is in private, and it does not make it to the Quran. Why was it important for God to make these verses then part of the Quran, whereas in His knowledge He understood that these verses will be misunderstood?
So you see, first of all, you have to understand that misunderstood or misunderstanding is something that can nevertheless take place in any sort of circumstances. So, had the suggestion that you're delivering, that God should have maybe done this in private, this could have caused a greater confusion, because now we find the prophet would be doing something, and that something is not even recorded in any of the texts, and it would have become all the more reason for people to follow him, because his whatever he would have done would have been communicated. Of course, that is something that could not have been left to posterity. So now it would have been even more dangerous, that people would now see that, well, if the prophet was waging war, if he was killing people, then we also have to follow suit. So I think it is not that this methodology should have been adopted. I think the current methodology, if you look at the fact that Muslims did not actually, instead of understanding the Quran directly from the sources, had they not undertaken this course, it would not have been a difficult task at all. It is because of the fact that in our own understanding, we took a different route in understanding the Quran. The Almighty, in His own right, had said, Hudal Nas, this is a guidance from mankind, it is for everyone. And therefore, it said that now you have to directly understand it. So he could not have done anything, because he had given us the freedom to choose, and he gave us this freedom to understand the Quran in whatever way we liked. And what happened was that, as far as when we tried to understand the Book of God, we left the Book of God either to just learn it by heart, or to use it as a means to for the dear departed to have their sins deleted from their record. So this is something that of course was, we are more guilty of that, I would say. So in any case, the third important point that I'd like to make here is that even if you make a gross misinterpretation of God's verses or His revelations, if you are very sincere in your understanding those verses, then yes, they will have their negative impact in this world, and that negative impact is something that we are seeing. But as far as the hereafter is concerned, that these differences of opinion would not reflect there, in my understanding, which means that a person who sincerely understood the Quran, even if it was a wrong interpretation, and he followed that interpretation, in the hereafter, his fate is safe, I would say, because he did not do something wrong which is deliberate, something which was intentional. It is that he just misunderstood. Yes, if he was careless in his understanding, yes, if he did not give enough time, that would be called to question. But for example, a person like Osama bin Laden or Mullah Omar, they sincerely, try to understand the Quran, and this is how they got this conclusion that, well, we have to follow the Prophet, and whatever he did, we need to do. And they could not make this distinction in their understanding. So, as I said, the negative impact of that is going to definitely take place in this world. But as far as the hereafter is concerned, remember, it's not that you understand the Quran exactly as what God would have wanted you to understand that would take you to a paradise. That's not what the Almighty has said. The Almighty has said that whatever you understand, and you give your best shot at that understanding, and then follow that understanding and implement it. And if you do that, even if you end at the wrong side, you will still be considered worthy of salvation. So I think that is also what we have to see, that in the grand scheme of things, the negative result of this misunderstanding, especially when the matter is of life and death, will take place in this world, but not in the hereafter.
Dr. Saab, very quickly, if I can ask a follow-up question. Obviously, the Prophet understood what the intention of these verses were, and the followers of the Prophet, the people who were alive in this time, understood what the time span, the limited time span of these verses was, that it was applicable only during the life of the Prophet and his mission. By what time do you think in Islamic history did we lose the meaning of the time limitation of these verses? Because obviously the people who were living in his times, and then the next generation and the next generation after that, would have known that these verses had limited application.
I think it was very soon. It was quite soon after the departure of the Prophet, and this is because, you see, when once the Romans and the Persian empires had been conquered in the times of the third and fourth caliph, I mean, this distinction that a further conquest after them is something that is unwarranted, and you should not cross a certain area. That was very, very much apparent to these companions. So we know that the Caliph Umar, in his own times, when once the army that he has sent had conquered the area, that the part where the Prophet had sent his letters, it is reported that once the army decided to cross that area, and the Caliph Umar stopped them and said that we cannot go beyond this area. It is only until this area is that law of Itmamul Hujjah applicable. So yes, in their understanding it was there, but once the whole Muslim empire had expanded to, that when the Roman and the Persian empires came under the subjugation of the Muslim empire, it was a huge amount of territory that had come under their rule. So later on, in the times of the Umayyads, I would say, and the Abbasids before them and after them, of course, it was like a momentum that had been built up of conquests, and without realizing that it was not a conquest that was assigned to them because of the fact they are going to wage war and punish people. It was as if that in that momentum, our own fiqh and our own jurists, that they were not very precise in this command. And of course, remember, the command of waging war against persecution, something was already there. So it may be that in the later part, that instead of looking at the fact that they were waging war for the cause of punishing people for denying the truth, it was perhaps the other motive which is still operational today, and that was that against persecution. So in that case, what needs to be done, and which has yet to be done, is that each and every battle that took place after the time of the Sahaba, let's say after the first 40 or 50 years, needs to be documented and seen, that what exactly were they fighting for? Were they fighting for persecution, which is of course a legitimate cause, or were they fighting for subjugating people because they wanted to punish people in the name of Islam for not complying, or not or being people who were worthy of this punishment? So that is an analysis that has to be made battle by battle after the first 30 or 40 years.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Riaz, please go ahead.
Darling Doc, I have just a
Go ahead,
little
sir.
different take situation.
Mhm.
The 2 points I'd like to make, and hope I'll get your like to get your comment on. One is that people like Osama bin Laden, they had a genuine cause, but they used Islam to include people who were not a part of their personal cause. And the other comment which I have, and I'd like to get your opinion on, is in the last 30 years, enemies of Islam, and I think most of whom I'm talking about, they have done a wonderful job of associating Islam and terrorism, even when there are causes which are legitimate to Muslims. Thank you.
So you see, as far as Osama bin Laden is concerned, I mean, if you say that he was misusing the Quran or wrongly using the Quran, I mean, that is something relative. Yes, to me, he was doing that. He was not. I mean, he had a wrong interpretation of Islam. But I think what he himself had is something only God can judge. That if he understood his interpretation to be the only correct version, and he was very sincere in following.
Can you repeat
Okay,
the
so
last 15 seconds?
last 15 seconds. What did I say?
You're
Okay,
talking about.
This was Bin Laden's situation. Bin
yeah. So
Laden's
I was making this point that, you see, I cannot judge Mr. Bin Laden according to my data that I have. All that I can say is that if he was sincere, and whatever he did was in all sincerity, then its evil or its wrong impact we do face that in this world. But in the hereafter, if, of course, if he did something in a way that he was absolutely sincere, and that is what he understood, and that is what he did in a very auspicious way, so that is God, for God to judge. I cannot comment on that, and I cannot say that, well, he has misused those verses. All that I can say, I mean, my understanding is that he has grossly misinterpreted them. But as I said, that misinterpretation, what is misinterpretation to me, is a correct interpretation to him. So that is what God has to decide on the day of judgment. And I mean, this is what I feel. And I forgot your second comment.
The second comment is the enemies of Islam have done a
Yes.
wonderful of associating
Yeah.
even
So yeah,
good.
that I agree. That I do agree with you. You see, what has happened is that if a handful of people have misinterpreted Islam, it's not that 99% of the Muslim ummah or population is with them. I mean, these are just handful of people, one maybe less than 1%. And because of the fact that they've been able to cause a lot of carnage, a lot of deaths resulting, that they have made headlines, and it's like bracketing one less than 1% people, and bracketing the rest of the Muslim ummah with them, and saying that, well, look at them, because they are Muslims, so the rest of the Muslims are also behind them. And I would say that is a very unfair assessment on their part. If this is a part of people who do something, then only that particular section of people should be condemned or maybe criticized. As far as the rest of the Muslim Ummah is concerned, I don't think that they can, they do in any way ratify what these people are doing. So yes, I think that would be a fair thing to say.
Just one thing, if I may.
Of course.
We knew from his sort of his jihad in certain ways. I'm just bringing up him simply because I know this could happen anytime in future, which
Yes.
is that we know already that Osama bin Laden was cornered, and he loved to basically take the revenge for the Westerners getting into Saudi and so on historically. And the only tools he had left over was to get out and kind of get a team of people together so that he can achieve whatever he needed. I mean, I'm not asking. I mean, I'm not saying that his causes were good or bad, but this situation could be used by anyone else bringing up in Islam, whereas they may have a genuine reason. That's fine, but particularly relevant to them rather than the whole ummah.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I mean, this is something, if they had done, other people can follow suit, and they are following suit. So even today, Abu Bakr Baghdadi in Nigeria, he has exactly the same agenda, and he is interpreting the Quran in the same way. But remember one thing, that this is much before Osama bin Laden became very prominent. I have talked about this before as well, that in the 1990s, and to be exact, it's 1994, I think, he issued a communique in which he had declared the United States to be to be his enemy number one. And in that communique, in that declaration, there were certain Quranic verses cited. And amongst those verses were the verses that we have just discussed, that are found in Surah Tawbah, which are specific to God's messenger. So I think that we are also to understand that he was being governed by an ideology that he had derived from the Quran, but which I said actually is a particular case or a very specific case of misinterpreting the nusus or the injunctions of the Quran, because those injunctions and those verses are specific to God's messenger, and he had cited exactly those verses and said that, look, this is what the Quran says. So the words that I do remember were faqatilu aimat al-kufr, which are one of the verses of Surah Tawbah. It says that kill or fight these leaders of disbelief, and he said this leader of disbelief today is the United States. So I think that this is what he believed, and yes, of course, I would say wrongly believed, but then that is what he believed sincerely. And if this is really the case, that he sincerely believed that he was following the Quran, that's what I'm saying, that in the hereafter, in all probability, inshallah, God will, judge him on what he sincerely understood.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our next
Thank
question asks, why is it that this very important concept of distinction between the two phases, prophetic times and post-prophetic times, were not recognized by the ulama in the subsequent generations?
I think I've just answered this question a while ago. Exactly the same question. That I mean, the real reason was that the ulama seldom took their understanding from the Quran directly. They were more occupied with fiqh, they were more occupied with hadith, and they were less occupied with understanding the Quran directly from its text. And that is one of the primary reasons that it never dawned upon them that this is a distinction that has been made by the Quran in no I mean, it's not anything like a like saying something that the Quran has said a few verses about this whole law. The Quran has made it amply clear every now and then that as far as the law of Itmam al-Hujjah is concerned, as the law of messenger is concerned, it is like one of the largest or one of the most prominent discussed topics of the Quran. But because the Quran never came into direct deliberation, direct understanding since the very beginning, maybe I would say very earlier on, that now things have started to happen in a different way.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Bisma, please go ahead.
So, Dr. Saleem, my question is, do you think it has something to do with power as well? That the intelligentsia that was, because Islam doesn't really give us, the Pope kind of a concept that Christianity does. Do you think it was more a control thing that the Maulvis at that time may have wanted?
No, I don't think so.
Whether
I don't think so. I think this was not any of the causes. I sincerely think that the cause was not understanding the distinctive position of the messengers of God. So you see,
Okay.
they thought that whatever directive have been given to the messengers of God, since they are the best exemplars, since they are portrayers of Uswa Hasana, so people thought that, well, they have to follow the messengers in whatever undertaking they did. So in my understanding, because I have met these people directly, some of them directly as well, I have heard about them, I mean, read about them. I mean, there are so many pointers which tell us that it's a genuine mistake on their part. And this could have been something which could be, I mean, anyone could have made this mistake. But yes, had people been more careful about, or maybe more sensitive about the fact that they're just going to study the Quran and derive their rulings from the Quran and not from fiqh or hadith or history or extraneous disciplines of knowledge, this might have been something which would have been pointed out very earlier on in our history. And another factor that you might also note here, that you see, our caliphate had been established right after the Prophet himself, and this continued until the last century, 1924. And today we are sitting in 2024. It's like an exact 100 years. So in those centuries in which the caliphate was there, because of the existence of the caliphate, because of the existence of a Muslim empire in some form or the other, you see, these sentiments were appeased in some form or the other, and Muslims were undertaking war, at the same time suffering from in various areas. We know the crusades had happened in all this time, and a lot of things were going on. It's only in the last 100 years that, because of the fact that there's no caliphate anywhere now, they are independent countries and persecution is taking place there, and now that their caliphate is no longer there, Muslims have this yearning to gain their past glory. And to gain their past glory, they think that going to the ballot, which means to go through an election process, is something that's not going to yield anything to them. And then some of them also think that democracy is against Islam. So all these issues actually clouded their vision, I would say. And in the end, they just thought that the only option that they are left with is militancy. And again, for this option too, they thought that it's not that they have, I mean, worked up this option themselves. They thought that they found its source in the Quran. So you see, there is a whole history of everything, and that is how I think it happened. And of course, then there were people other than the sincere ones who took advantage of the situation, and they used this as an agenda to settle their personal vendettas, or to settle some revenge, or to certain other things. But then, as I said, when you do certain things in a wrong way, then you give an opportunity to all other people to step in and take things to their own advantage. So that is something that could have taken place, but that's not the primary reason to me, I think.
Okay. So just a short question. Can I ask it, Mariam, or
Yeah,
is
go
somebody else? So what is the responsibility to Rohingya Muslims who are being persecuted in China? Is there, as a Muslim people, do we have any responsibility towards them, or
Of course,
what is one
you
support?
see, it's all of the Muslim countries, they have a responsibility, and the only thing is that, for example, Pakistan thinks that it's a very good friend of China, and whenever this issue is brought up before them, they just snub you and they don't allow you to even speak on this issue. So you see, China is like a superpower now, and if you have to make it realize that it's doing something in a very in a wrong way, then you have to ask them. And whenever you have asked them, they have given this. I mean, they used to give this pretext that they said that they are causing a lot of I mean, unrest in the areas that they live. So they have their own version of the Rohingyas. But I think in this regard, it is again because we have a world forum like the United Nations in which this issue has to be raised and settled. It's not just that you can wage war against China, because I've said this earlier on also, that today waging war cannot be an option unless and until you withdraw as a signatory from the United Nations, because almost every Muslim country has entered into this pact that it will not commit any aggression. So, I mean, you first need to call them to account in the United Nations platform and tell them to be answerable for what they did. And then at the same time, create a pressure from the Muslim bloc, which of course is not there at the moment, but somehow if that can be possible. And thirdly, if there's a Muslim country or maybe a group of them that can really challenge the Chinese for this, and they think that the only way out is a militant struggle or a military campaign, then of course they have to first of all withdraw from the United Nations signatures that they had done to for a no war pact. So these are a lot of steps, and there's a lot of things that are hindrances towards this. But one thing is certain, and that is that any moral pressure which these Muslim countries can create, they are not creating that even. Even there's no one talking about them in a sufficient way, because everyone is afraid of China. So remember, Chinese, there's a communist regime there. They would not allow people to, even within their own country, there is a big hush up. Of course, there are good people there as well. So they are, if they talk about what their country is doing, they're just going to be picked up and just disappear. So that there is this tyrannical atmosphere within China as well. And outside of China, we know that very few people or very few countries are in a position to take them to task in any way. I'm not taking in a negative way, but even to ask them to explain what they are doing. So even that is not happening.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Saleem.
Thank you. Ammar Rasul, please go ahead. We're short on time, so please try to keep your questions concise.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, I want to say that the Rohingya Muslims are in Burma, and the Muslims being persecuted in China are the Uyghur Muslims. Okay.
Oh, yes,
Here is my question.
Correct. Yes.
Here is my question. Dr. Saab, I wanted to ask you about the liberation movement of Algeria. This starts in 1950s, and they, during the 20 years, they are able to win their liberation. And this liberation movement becomes an inspiration for South Africa and for the liberation movement in Palestine and for the liberation movement even in Ireland. And what is strange is that these people are not only attacking combatants, they are also attacking non-combatants, because there are huge French quarters just like in Israel and Palestine right now, and
Correct.
these
Algeria
Muslims are
also.
going in and they are attacking non-combatants and civilians constantly. Also, from the Quranic rule or the God's rule point of view, about you being somewhat commensurate to your enemy as far as power, military power is concerned, these people were nowhere near to the power of the French military. Yet, God somehow granted them victory, and they won their liberation, and now they have a free country. How do you see this? How do you explain this? Because
I think this is not God granting them victory. This is their evil ways that have come to fruition, I would say. So it's not that God is going to interfere in such matters. Remember, God just interferes in the times of His messengers, and He does not let such things happen. For the post-prophetic era, the Almighty does not interfere in these matters and lets these matters happen, because for the post-prophetic era, the Almighty's law is that He's going to take an account of these actions in the hereafter. So we cannot ascribe this victory to the Almighty letting them win. They use wrong measures. I mean, there are several examples in history, in our own history as well, in our Ottoman history, in our Mughal history, and many other parts of the world, in which Muslims have employed wrong measures or against the Sharia measures, I would say, and they have still won. So we cannot attribute this victory to the fact that God is helping us. I mean, it's just God's law of trial and test, in which He's letting us do whatever we like and then calling us account once and for all in the hereafter. And of course, there are other things at play as well. It's not just the Algerians or their own freedom fighters doing that. We have reports of many other countries and other players, so to speak, who are world players who have their own say, and they are also having a role in that. So I think it's not as simple as we are thinking it is. There are a number of other things, other factors as well, and even if those factors are accounted for, we cannot say that it's like God's help that has come to them.
Ahmad, do you have a follow-up question, or are you
Yes,
good?
my question simply is that had they not played it this way, they would still be under French rule. So, now we have a Muslim nation, a free
So
nation. So,
you
how do
see,
you see that?
it's not an objective of being a free nation, which is a God-given objective. I mean, this is
Hmm.
something that they have achieved in a wrong way.
Hmm.
So like a Robin Hood concept. If you're doing something, if you're achieving something, but you are adopting the wrong means, so you cannot justify your end through your means by saying that, well, because we are able to win freedom, so any way that we adopt it is fine. I mean, this is a Robin Hood concept, which the Quran does not recognize. And if they would have been maybe closer to God had they remained in subjugation and not adopted these means which are against the Sharia. Because remember, ultimately, it is the attitude that you have regarding God and the respect that you have for the directives of Sharia that's going to ultimately count. It's not freedom in this world that's going to count in any way as far as your salvation is concerned in the hereafter. I mean, these are not the right barometers, these are not the right parameters or standards of success, I would say.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all of the questions today. Inshallah, see you tomorrow in another session of textual study of the Quran. Thanks to all who came by and asked their wonderful questions. And thank you, Dr. Saleem, for another very informative session. Inshallah, see you
Thank you.
tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum assalam.